Hey there people, so today I am bringing you my Terraria 1.4 Summoner Whips Guide. I will be covering in detail how the new whip weapon type works, modifier and reforge options, accessories, going over all of the whips. I will be demonstrating each whip individually against these dummies here, and later I will also at the end of the video demonstrate each one in turn against a boss. So if you just want to see the whips, just skip ahead. There will be timestamps in the description for whichever part you're interested in. Whips are primarily intended for use by summoners and do summon damage, but can arguably be useful even for other classes, particularly in combination with one or more minions. So let's first talk about the special properties of whips. Well, whips pierce through multiple targets. They direct your minions to attack the enemies you strike, and they do summon damage, so their power is amplified by damage boost for the summoner class. The damage that you inflict decreases the more enemies or parts are hit by the same strike. This can limit the number of enemies that the whips will pierce through to less than their actual range. And just to demonstrate that, I've got these dummies lined up here, and you can see with the leather whip, because it's a low powered whip, it hits the first 4, but then it's only doing 1 to the 4th one, and so even though you can see that the whip goes farther, it stops hitting past that. And that mostly is only a problem with the earlier whips, but just so you know, that is a thing. At the same time, although whips do inflict summon damage, whips are affected by melee speed boost, which is very interesting. Many whips also add additional summon tag damage to the attacks of your minions. Those whips that don't do that generally have other special bonuses or effects instead. So the summoner tag damage boost lasts 4 seconds after the enemy is hit by the whip. Both the summon tag bonuses and generally the other special effects that some of the whips have do not affect enemies that are immune to all debuffs. So that's particularly certain bosses will not be affected by the summon tag damage or the special effects. So as I say, as far as, let's get to whip modifiers and reforging. So whips can gain the same modifiers as melee weapons, even though they do summon damage. Summon damage, melee modifiers. So they will be affected by damage boosts, knockback boosts, but they will not be affected by critical strike, because as summoner weapons, they cannot normally deal critical hits. Modifiers that affect weapon size do not appear to affect the range of the whips. Interestingly, yeah, so there are those 3 stats to pay attention to. Damage, knockback, and speed. Of course, higher damage is good, higher knockback is good. Speed is not so clear, though, because modifiers affecting their speed actually also affect their length inversely. So it's an unusual trade-off in that slow modifiers make the whips have a longer range, and fast modifiers make them shorter. So it really depends what you're going for as far as what modifier you're going to want. Modifiers that would usually be bad might actually be preferable if you want a longer whip rather than a faster whip. And as far as which modifiers are the best, again, there are trade-offs here. So the best modifier or reforge options for all whips are the same, so far at least. There's always the possibility of changes and updates. Sluggish is actually the best modifier for length. Normally that would be a bad modifier, but because it has a speed penalty, it actually makes for a longer range. Bulky provides both a damage and length boost because it has a speed penalty, but a damage boost, so bulky is a good option. Whereas legendary actually provides the highest total damage and a knockback boost, but because it has a speed bonus, speed is good, it's faster, but it has a shorter length. So it depends whether you want speed or length. Godly, demonic, ruthless, and sharp are all good options as well, because they all provide a similar damage boost, but without that length penalty that legendary has. Ruthless actually has the largest damage bonus, but it has a knockback penalty, whereas Godly boosts both damage and knockback. So there are arguments to be made for Sluggish, Bulky, Legendary, Godly, or Ruthless, each being the best modifier for the whips in general, depending which stat is more important to you. So just to demonstrate that, I have 6 different leather whips. So standard whip does that. and this is with no boosting accessories or effects or anything. A sluggish one, you'll see it actually reaches farther, although because it's just the leather whip, it doesn't do enough damage to actually hit the additional ones, but the higher level whips it will. Bulky, you can see, does a little more damage, and also reaches a little farther than the original. And legendary, here's where you can see these actually, it hits pretty quickly, but it doesn't go as far. So again, godly gives you, see, you can see because of that damage boost and without the range penalty, godly is actually sometimes hitting the extra dummy. It did there initially. It's kind of funny the way that works. And ruthless gives you the highest damage boost. Again, you'll notice there are no critical strikes here. So it depends on the whip, you know, how many of these is going to hit. Most of the whips beyond the leather whip will manage to hit as far as they actually reach. The leather whip having the lowest damage doesn't do that, but there you go. So that's very interesting. And the other thing that I want to talk about here is melee speed. So melee armor, even though these are summon weapons, melee armor, accessories, and buffs will actually increase their speed. So despite the modifiers on the weapons will only affect, are the only thing that affects the length, whereas melee accessories that affect melee speed will not affect the length. They will actually affect the actual speed without giving you penalties to the length or without making them longer as well. So it won't make them shorter, won't make them longer. Melee accessories and other buffs and armor will increase the speed without changing the length. So melee armor and accessories can make them faster, but will not increase damage per hit. They are not affected by melee damage boosts, only speed boosts. So as you can see, I've kind of charted this out. The Titan Glove and its derivatives, as with melee weapons, will allow whips to auto swing, and you can also get speed boosts, but whips do not gain effects from flasks. Those are still only for melee weapons. Flasks will not give you boosts for effects, you know, like fire and so on. The various flasks of whatever will not affect whips. You will not get those effects. So I wanted to demonstrate that quickly here. I'm going to show you two different things. First of all, I'm going to gear up with a bunch of melee speed boosting focused things here. And so now you'll notice that allows me to hit very quickly. And in fact, if I go for legendary with the highest speed boost, it'll be even a little bit quicker. So if you want to go for speed, that's what you can do. Just optimize for melee speed. But the alternative, or one alternative, is also damage. So I brought a bunch of summoner gear here as well. I guess I could have just done that. And what we're going to do here is put in summoner damage boosting accessories so that you can see the alternative as far as maximizing your damage output with the whips instead. Actually, yeah, Celestial Shell still works. So here we go, and if we go for regular, no modifier, you'll notice I don't have the auto swing now because I took out the melee auto swing, but look how high the damage is there. And so we'll go with Ruthless to maximize that damage, and you'll notice now I'm consistently hitting that extra dummy because it's doing enough extra damage, even with the leather whip, that I can actually get that extra dummy. So now let's actually talk about the actual whips themselves. First of all, the leather whip is the first one we're going to talk about. There are just 2 whips available in pre-hard mode, and there are 6 in hard mode for a total of 8 whips. The leather whip is the most basic whip. It has a base damage of just 14. It has 4 summon tag damage, so it will add to the damage done by your minions. It has 0.5 knockback, a 30 use time, and 8 velocity. The Leather Whip is actually bought from the Zoologist. When you have 15% of the bestiary filled out, which translates to 80 entries. Once you have 80 entries in your bestiary, then and only then, the Zoologist will sell you the Leather Whip. So, if you don't have your 80 entries yet, just keep exploring around your world, and eventually, when you find enough enemies and you have enough entries, 80 entries in your bestiary, then and only then, the Zoologist will sell you the Leather Whip. So, I've obviously already shown you the Leather Whip in action, but let's move on to the Snapthorn. So the Snapthorn is also available in pre-hard mode. It's an upgraded whip which can be crafted after spending a little bit of time in the underground jungle. It has a base of 18 damage, 6 summon tag damage, 1 knockback, the same 30 use time and 8 velocity. Almost all of the whips have that 30 use time. Many of them, most of them have 8 velocity, but there are exceptions, so we'll get to those later. The Snapthorn also has a chance to poison enemies and briefly grants a melee speed buff when an enemy is struck. 4 seconds, I believe, is the speed bonus for the various whips that have a speed bonus. And the Snapthorn is crafted from 12 stingers, 3 vines, and 3 jungle spores at an anvil. So let's show you this quickly here. Here's the Snapthorn, and you can see it is inflicting poison. It's doing a little higher damage. Still, with the basic modifier, it's not actually hitting the extra dummies, even though, again, it is reaching that far. But that's basically the Snapthorn. It's a nice little upgrade. It definitely does a little more damage. And, of course, with a better modifier, you can do a little better yet. But let's move on to hard mode. So the first whip that you can get when you enter hard mode is the Firecracker, and it's the most basic hard mode whip upgrade. It actually has a chance to drop from the Wall of Flesh, so literally the first that you can get as you enter hard mode. It has a base of 40 damage, 2 knockback, 30 use time, and 8 velocity. Rather than having a direct summon tag damage bonus, it creates an explosive energy field around the first enemy that it hits. And that's pretty interesting. The next time that enemy is struck by one of your minions, that field explodes and deals 3 times the damage that your minion would normally do. It also lights all enemies that it hits on fire if they're not immune. And the Firecracker also produces light, which makes it potentially useful for exploring underground. The Firecracker has a 1 in 8 chance to drop from the Wall of Flesh in normal mode, or a 1 in 4 chance in expert mode. So let's again just switch out here and show you the Firecracker, and you'll notice this can actually hit all of the dummies because it's doing enough damage all the way out to the end that it is actually hitting all the way to as far as it can reach. So it's not actually because just the length, but because it's doing enough damage to actually continue to afflict as that damage decreases as it hits more enemies. It's still doing enough to hit out towards the end, and you'll notice it sometimes hits the last one, sometimes doesn't, because it's still not super powerful. But let's move along to the next one, the Cool Whip, or should I say Cool Whip, because it references Family Guy in the tooltip. But anyway, it's a slightly better whip, which, when it strikes an enemy, summons a snowflake projectile. So instead of having summon tag damage, again, both of these first two, no summon tag damage, instead have special effects. The Cool Whip has a base of 50 damage, 1.5 knockback, 30 use time, and 8 velocity. The snowflake registers as a buff, which the speed bonuses do as well, by the way. This one doesn't have the speed bonus, but the snowflake does register as a buff. It'll show a little icon. The snowflake chases nearby enemies and inflicts 10 damage ignoring armor, which is interesting. It's not the only one that does that. We'll get to another one later, but it simply does 10 damage ignoring the enemy's defense. It also ignores damage bonuses other than banners, however, so whatever damage bonuses you might have, that snowflake will not take those up other than the banners. And striking, again, will reset the duration that snowflake hangs around and damages enemies for. The Cool Whip is crafted from 8 Souls of Light, 8 Souls of Night, 1 Frost Core, and that's all crafted at a hard mode anvil, so a mithril or orichalcum anvil. So let's see it in action here. And there it is. You won't see the snowflake against the dummies because they're not actual enemies. But again, you'll see just because it does a little more damage, it's more consistently hitting that last dummy there. But let's move along. The other one that we're going to talk about next is the Durendal, if I'm even saying that properly. It's a faster whip that can be crafted after defeating at least one mechanical boss. It has a base of 55 damage, 9 summon tag damage, so there's the first one in hard mode that has summon tag damage again, 2 knockback, 30 use time, and 12 velocity. It grants a temporary melee speed buff when it strikes an enemy, which then makes it even faster. So actually, like the Snapthorn does that as well. The Durendal is named after a legendary sword, and so the icon looks like a sword, but it is a whip in the game. It's also a reference to something else. It is crafted from 12 hallowed bars at a hard mode anvil as well. So that's the Cool Whip. So let's switch to the Durendal, and you'll notice, yeah, I don't think that happens against dummies. Yeah, see, it briefly brings up that little Durendal's Blessing buff, it's called, which allows it to strike faster. And that's what that speed boost does. And same thing with the other ones that I've talked about and will talk about that have a speed bonus. So those are the first 3 in hard mode, and I should note here that the last 3 whips that you can get in hard mode, the last 3 whips we're going to talk about, all can only be obtained after defeating Plantera. Dark Harvest is a powerful whip that can only be obtained from the Pumpkin Moon event. It has 100 base damage, 3 knockback, 30 use time, and 12 velocity. Enemies hit by the Dark Harvest are inflicted with a dark energy aura or field. When your minions then attack those enemies, the dark energy flares and damages additional nearby enemies. Much like the Cool Whip Snowflake, enemies are hit with 10 damage, ignoring armor and other bonuses, other than, of course, banners. The Dark Harvest also applies a second buff, a speed buff, similar to the Snapthorn and Durendal, and because of the Dark Energy effect, it works best with rapidly attacking minions, because the more they attack, the more it's going to inflict that Dark Energy, and the more damage your minions are going to do. The Dark Harvest is dropped by pumpkins during the Pumpkin Moon event. It's not a specific rate because Pumpkin Moon and Frost Moon, that's how they work. It's a varying rate of drops. The farther you get in the event, the better your chances of getting it. So let's have a look at the Dark Harvest. So you can see that sort of sparkling effect around them, and it lingers for a while. If you could have dummies attacked by minions, then that would actually hit them, but of course that doesn't happen, so we'll demonstrate all these later. But let's move along. Kaleidoscope is the next one, and second to last one we're going to talk about. It is a very powerful general purpose whip with the highest summon tag damage in the game. It has a base of 165 damage, 4 knockback, 30 use time, and 12 velocity. It also adds 20 summon tag damage, and interestingly, a 10% summon tag critical strike chance for your minion attacks. So normally minions cannot do critical strikes, but it does give them a chance here. Effectively, it is actually the most powerful of the whips overall. The Kaleidoscope has a 1 in 4 chance to drop from the Empress of Light boss. So let's have a look at that. You can see it is pretty, it is powerful, and it is smacking those dummies very hard. So it's a very powerful whip, and technically, if combined with minions particularly, it becomes the most powerful whip in the game. But we're going to talk about another one anyway, because it has the highest base damage and some other special effects. The Morning Star, highest base damage of any whip with very high knockback. You'll notice that the knockback kind of went up slowly with the other whips. This one not so much. But the Morning Star, the downside of it is that it has a much slower speed, and it actually has lower summon tag damage as well. So it has a base of 180 damage, the highest base damage. 11 knockback, by far the highest knockback. 45 use time, though. This is the exception to that use time. It definitely is slower than the other whips, and it has 8 velocity. It also adds 5 summon tag damage and 5% summon tag critical strike to your minion attacks. So you can see those stats are definitely clearly lower than the Kaleidoscope. Kaleidoscope had 20 summon tag damage and 10% summon tag critical strike. The Morningstar has 5 summon tag damage and 5% summon critical strike. So there are trade-offs between the two whips. It's still a very powerful whip. It has a 1 in 200 chance to drop from blue, rusty, and hell armored bones when you're in the dungeon after defeating Plantera. Again, these last 3 all after defeating Plantera. So there will be a link to the whips on the wiki in the description of this video. But let's go ahead and do one more thing, and that is to actually demonstrate all of these against a boss. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to not even put on any armor here, which could be dangerous. I'm just going to fight King Slime, though, so I'm just using bonuses that will increase my number of summons so that you can see the raw damage output of the whips and what they do to the minions as well. So I am going to zoom out here so that I can see what's going on. And I'm going to summon King Slime, and we'll probably have to summon him a couple of times. I didn't even bring any health potions. I sure hope I don't die. So here we go, and I actually haven't even summoned my minions yet, so I should have a few of those. So you can see, if I leave them and I don't use my whip, they're just going to do that much damage. But if I switch to even just the simple leather whip, you can see their damage increases noticeably. And it's only 4 seconds though, so you have to keep whipping. Whip it good. So let's move on to the Snapthorn then. Come on, slimes, get the other bigger slime. So you can see their damage kind of decreases if I don't keep whipping, and then it goes up again when I do. And let's get into the more serious whips now. And there's that explosion I was talking about. So they will inflict that little explosion with the Firecracker. So let's try the Cool Whip, and there's that snowflake. Cool Whip launches that snowflake. It hangs around a little while. If I keep whipping, that snowflake will continue to hang around. Although it got kind of lost there. So I might want to let it go. There we go. There we go. And I can keep that snowflake around by continually whipping. Oh, and I died. Ouch. I guess I should have brought some health potions. But 1 second, and I will get some health potions and get right back to demonstrating the other whips. Alright, here we go. Let's summon King Slime again. I'll get my summons out while he's on his way. And we wanted to do the Durendal next. So here comes King Slime. I probably should have removed the dummies for that matter. But there we go. Durendal with the speed bonus as well. Again, this is with no other accessories. And no summon damage boosts. No armor. So there's that. And then we'll do the final 3. The really powerful ones. And here comes the Dark Energy. You'll see as he gets near the other slimes. Actually, I should have turned on these spawns again. There we go. Oh. See, I shouldn't be busy doing that. Okay, here we go one last time. I put some armor on so that, you know, I won't die so easily this time. And just some armor that won't affect the damage output. So here we go. We'll get back to the Dark Harvest quickly just so you can see that Dark Energy again in action. And you'll notice again that King Slime is basically because of that Dark Energy, those other enemies that he's spawning, since especially I turned those on again, will quickly die from that dark energy as the slimes actually attack him. So then we'll get the Kaleidoscope out, and this is going to do massive damage. Might kill King Slime too quickly if we're not careful, so we'll quickly switch to the Morning Star as well, which you can see is clearly slower and does not boost the minions as much, although it itself does quite a lot of damage. So there we go, we just took out King Slime, and that is all the whips in Terraria. And I hope you liked the video, so thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.